Hello my dear students. So today's topic we have correlation. Okay. Now before starting this correlation, we have to go to some introduction part. Okay. We have to discuss about the introduction. What is actually this correlation? So in our real life situation, we come across a various situation in which two variables are interrelated. So here variables means it may be income and expenditure. So income is one of the variable, expenditure is another variable. Similarly, we can take the other example also, like price of different goods and commodity, and the quantity demand of the various goods and services. Okay, so here income, prices, expenditure, quantity demand, these all are the variables. So you might be getting confused that what is the variables. So variable means maybe prices, maybe expenditure, so maybe income. So when we are taking the example of this one, income, okay, income and expenditure. So this income is also one of the variables, expenditure is another variables. When I am taking the example of prices and quantity demand, so this prices is also one of the variables and the quantity demand is also another variable. So here the two variables are interrelated. If we see this price and quantity demand is also interrelated, income and expenditure is also interrelated. So here we can see that the variables are interrelated with each other. Now what is the meaning of that interrelation or interrelated variables? So interrelated variable means when the value of one variable changes, it also changes the value of other variable. Suppose say when our income is changing, okay, when our income is changing, income is either increasing or decreasing, then increase in income has the power to change the value of this expenditure. So if income is increasing, your expenditure may increase. Okay, if your income is increasing, expenditure may increase. Similarly, if your income is decreasing, your expenditure will also decrease. So we can see that the value of changing the value of one variable when the income is changing, and due to that change in income, it has also impact on the other variable, that is expenditure. So expenditure is also changing. It may change in the positive direction, negative direction, that is another thing. But what we can see that when the value of one variable is changing, it is also changing the value of other variables. Let's take another example. Suppose say we are taking the two variables, that is price and quantity demand. Now if the price of a commodity is either increasing or decreasing, it has a power to influence the quantity demand. So the value of quantity demand will also change. Suppose say the price is increasing. Let's take price is increasing. Now when the price of commodity increases, the quantity demand, this one will, the quantity demand will decrease. Similarly, suppose say let's take another case in which the price is suppose say decreasing, and when the price of commodity decreases, the quantity demand will increase. Okay, when the price of commodity is decreasing, quantity demand will increase, and when price is increasing, quantity demand will decrease. So we can see that when the value of one variable is changing, it causes the change in the value of another variable also. So that we are going to discuss in this correlation. Now we will move to the definition part. What is correlation? In a simple way, we can say that correlation means the degree of association between the two variables. Okay, the degree of association between two variables. So here you have to understand the meaning. Degree of association. Degree of association is nothing but how one variable are interrelated with other. If the value of one variable is changing, then it may also change the value of other variables. So that is called degree of association. Okay, so here we can see that if you take the example of this income and expenditure, if you take the example of this price and quantity demand, in each case we have seen that if the value of one variable, if income is changing, it is also changing the value of your expenditure. This variable is also changing. If our income is increasing, expenditure will also increase. If our income is decreasing, expenditure will also decrease. So here we can see that one one variable is changing, it is also changing the value of other variable. So that is exactly correlation. Once again, what is correlation? Correlation is defined as the degree of association between the two variables. Two variables, it may be income and expenditure, it may be price and quantity demand. So when income is changing, your expenditure may increase or decrease. Okay. Normally what happens that when our income increases, expenditure will also increase. If our income decreases, expenditure will also decrease. Similarly, in the case of this price and quantity demand, if price of commodity decreases, quantity demand increases, and when price increases, quantity demand will decrease. So here we can see that price and quantity demand are interrelated with each other. So that is what we are going to discuss in this chapter, correlation. Okay, so the next part we need to discuss is types of correlation. So correlation can be classified into various categories on the basis of their change in the direction, change in the ratio of proportion. So first we will discuss on the basis of direction of change. So types of correlation, it can be classified into various categories on the basis of different categories. So first category we have on the basis of change, on the basis of direction of change. On the basis of direction of change. So on the basis of this direction of change, the correlation can be classified into positive correlation and negative correlation. Okay, it can be classified into two parts. One is called okay, so on the basis of direction of change, the correlation can be classified into two categories. One is called positive correlation and the second one we have negative correlation. So here you have to understand what is positive correlation. Positive correlation means when two variables are changing in the same direction. Okay, when the two variables are changing in the same direction. Let's take the example. Okay, I will explain with the help of this example. Let's take income and expenditure. So this income and expenditure are two variables. Now we can see that when income increases, okay, when income increases, this upward arrow shows increase in income. When income increases, we can see that the expenditure, okay, expenditure will also increase. Similarly, if income suppose say decreases, expenditure will also decrease. So we can see that the two variables are moving in the same direction. If income is increasing, your expenditure is also increasing. If income is decreasing, expenditure is also decreasing. So this type of correlation is called what? Positive correlation. Okay, so we can take the example, this income and expenditure. So income and expenditure are two variables that are positive interrelated, or we can say that there is a positive correlation between these two variables, that is income and expenditure. Now I will explain you this negative correlation. Okay, so what are the variables that have negative relationship? Okay, so here we can take the example of, in the case of this negative correlation, we can take the example of price and quantity demand. Okay, price and quantity demand. So we can see that this price and quantity demand has negative relationship. Okay, that means if price increases, quantity demand, this, let's represent this quantity demand by QD. So when price increases, quantity demand will decrease. So we can see that these two variables are moving in the opposite direction. If price is increasing, quantity demand is decreasing. Similarly, suppose say if price is decreasing, we can see that quantity demand will increase. Okay, so here also both the movement of these two variables are in opposite direction. If price is decreasing, quantity demand is increasing. If price is increasing, quantity demand is decreasing. Whereas in the case of positive correlation, we can see that income and expenditure. Okay, if income is increasing, expenditure is also increasing. If income is decreasing, expenditure is also decreasing. So here the movement of both the variables are in the same direction. So that type of relationship is called positive correlation. And if the two variables are moving in the opposite direction or they are inversely related, then that can be considered as negative correlation. Okay, so this is the classification of correlation on the basis of direction of change. Now next one we will discuss the another type. Now the next category of correlation we have classified on the basis of a ratio of variation in the variables. So how there is a variation in the ratio of a variables, how the two variables are varying in the terms of ratio. So on the basis of that, we have classified the correlation into two types. One is called linear correlation and the other one is called non-linear correlation. So here you have to understand what is linear correlation. So linear correlation, in order to explain that linear correlation, let's take the example income and suppose say expenditure. Now suppose say if the income is increasing by 10% and every time due to change in income, every time your expenditure is changing by suppose 8%. Okay, every time if your expenditure due to, once again listen, if your income is changing by 10% and due to that change in income by 10%, suppose say your expenditure is changing by 8% every time, not only one time but every time. Next time also if it is changing by 8%, if your income is changing by 10%, okay, if your income is changing by 10%, again your expenditure is changing by 8%, then that type of relationship is called linear relationship. Here the income and expenditure is more or less changing in the constant rate. Okay, changing by a constant rate, so that is called linear correlation. Now next case, okay, we will explain this non-linear correlation. So here also let's take example of income and expenditure. Now here if your income is changing by 10% and sometimes your expenditure is changing by suppose say 8%, sometimes your expenditure is changing by 6%, sometimes your expenditure is changing by 7%, then we can see that the ratio, there is a variation in the ratio. Sometimes it is your expenditure is changing by 8%, sometimes it is changing by 6%, sometimes it is changing by 7%. So that type of category is called non-linear correlation. Once again, please try to understand this concept. Linear correlation means when the value of a variable is changing, and suppose say we have considered income and expenditure. Now if your income is changing by 10% and due to that change in income by 10%, if your expenditure is changing by 8% every time means first time also it is changing by 8%, second time also it is changing by 8%, third time also it is changing by 8%, then that can be considered as a linear correlation. But in the case of non-linear correlation, when your income is changing by 10%, sometimes your expenditure is changing by 8%, sometimes it is changing by 5%, sometimes it is changing by 4% or 6% or 7%. When there is a variation in the change in this expenditure, so that type of relationship called non-linear correlation. Okay, so next type of correlation. So next type of correlation can be classified on the basis of number of variables. Number of variables means the variables may be 2, maybe 3, more than 3, maybe 2, and some of the variable is considered as constant. So I will explain different types of this correlation. So first let's consider this simple correlation. In the case of this simple correlation, it shows the value of change in one variable, okay, and the value of other variable. Let's take example of this simple correlation. Suppose say income and expenditure. Okay, so here when your income is changing, your expenditure is also changing. When your income increases, your expenditure will also increase. When your income decreases, your expenditure will also decrease. So this type of relationship is called simple correlation. Now next one we have multiple correlation. So in the case of multiple correlation, we can see that the influence of more than two variables at the same time. Okay, we can see that in the case of multiple correlation, more than three variables have impact on each other at a same time. Let's consider production of food grains. So this production example we have production of food grains. So this production of food grains depends on many variables. Number one, we can see high yielding variety of seeds. Okay, high yielding variety of seeds. Then next one we have rainfall. Next one we have fertilizers. So here we can see that this production of food grains depends on many variables: high yielding varieties of seeds, okay, amount of rainfall received, and the amount of fertilizers used. So more than 3, 1, 2, 3. So change in the production causes by due to change in many variables. Like if there is a high yielding varieties of seeds, your production will be better. If you will get a good amount of rainfall, then yes, your production will be more. If you are using the fertilizers, and in that case also it will have some impact on the production of this food grain. So we can see that more than three variables have impact on each other at the same time. Okay, that is on the production. So this type of relationship is called multiple correlation, where we can see that there is an involvement of more than 2 or 3 variables at the same time. So this production of food grains, okay, food grains has influenced by 3 variables: high yielding varieties of seeds, rainfall, use of fertilizers. If it is better, production will be better. If rainfall is less, if fertilizers is not used, and if you are not using good quality of seeds, in that case your production may be less. So here we can see that more than 3 variables are involved. So impact of each variables are equally important in this case, so that comes under multiple correlation. Now next one we have partial correlation. In the case of partial correlation, we shows only the relationship between the two variables, and the impact of other variables can be considered as a constant. Okay, when we explain the law of demand. Now I will explain you this partial concept of this partial correlation. So this partial correlation, in the case of law of demand, we only shows the relation between price and quantity demand. But there are other factors, there are other variables to influence the quantity demand. But what we are doing that we keep some of the factor as a constant. We will not include the influence or the impact of other factors at a same time. So what are the other factors that we keep as a constant while explaining this law of demand? So the other factor that is kept constant are income of the consumer, taste and preference, okay, taste and preference, then credit facility. So many other variables are there that is kept constant. These all are constant. These all are constant while explaining the law of demand. So here we only show the relation between price and quantity demand. That means when price increases, quantity demand will decrease, and when price decreases, quantity demand will increase. So here we are showing the relation between two variables, but the impact or the influence of the other factors or the other variables are kept constant. So that is the case of partial correlation. I hope this concept is clear. Once again, in the case of simple correlation, we shows the relation between the two variables. Like I have given the example of income and expenditure. When your income increases, expenditure will also increase. When income decreases, your expenditure will also decrease. Now in the case of multiple correlation, I have given the example of agricultural production of food grains. So this production of food grains depends on many factors: rainfall, amount of rainfall received, fertilizers used, high yielding varieties of seeds. So if the quality of seed is better, if amount of rainfall received is sufficient, if the fertilizers used is in a good proportion, then the productivity will increase. So here more than three variables are involved. Now in the case of this partial correlation, we can see that we are showing the relation between two variables and the impact of other variables are kept as constant. So when we show the relation between price and quantity demand, we are keeping income of the consumer, taste and preference, credit facility, government policy as a constant. Other determinants are kept constant. So if price increases, quantity demand decreases. When price decreases, quantity demand increases. But the impact of other variables are kept constant. So that is the case of partial correlation. Now next topic we have degrees of correlation. So here when we determine the value of correlation coefficient, on the basis of that correlation coefficient value, we can say that there is a perfect correlation, there is a perfect positive correlation, there is a perfect negative correlation, there is a high correlation or low correlation. Okay, so this correlation coefficient is represented by R. Okay, R, and the value of R lies between -1 to +1. Okay, now we will discuss the different degrees. So actually this correlation coefficient shows the degree of closeness between the two variables, how these two variables, how much they are close to each other. Okay, so that relationship is shown by this correlation coefficient. Now let's discuss the first one, perfect. So this perfect correlation may be perfect positive correlation, may be perfect negative correlation. Now in which case there is a perfect positive correlation? Perfect positive correlation means if we are talking about two variables and if two variables are changing by the same proportion. Okay, these two variables, in the case of perfect positive correlation, if the value of two variables are changing by the same proportion, if it increases, then it will increase in the same proportion. If it decreases, it will decrease in the same proportion. Let's take the example of again income and expenditure. If income is suppose say increasing, okay, income is increasing by suppose say 10%, and due to increasing income by 10%, suppose say your expenditure is also increasing by 10%. Okay, income is increasing by 10% and due to that expenditure is also changing by 10%. If income is decreasing by 10% and exactly your expenditure is also decreasing by 10%, then this situation comes under perfect positive correlation. Okay, perfect positive correlation means the two variables will change in the same proportion. Okay, if one is changing by 10%, other will also change by 10%. So when income is increasing by 10%, your expenditure is also increasing by 10%. So this comes under positive correlation. And if there is a positive correlation, the value of R will be +1. Okay, the value of R will be +1. Now next we will move to the perfect. Now we'll move to perfect negative correlation. Okay, perfect negative correlation. So what is that perfect negative correlation? So first we have to know the relation between these two variables which have negative relationship. So when we are discussing about this price and quantity demand, we can see that price and quantity demand are negatively related. Okay, negatively related. So when price of a commodity is changing by 10%, and due to that, if your quantity demand is decreasing, suppose the price is increasing and quantity demand is decreasing by 10%. So here see, your price is increasing by 10%, but quantity demand is decreasing by 10%. So though there is a change in the value of variables by the same proportion, but they are moving in the opposite direction, so that's why it is called perfect negative correlation. Okay, perfect negative correlation. And in the case of perfect negative correlation, the value of this r will be minus 1. Okay, now next one, high. So high correlation means when we are considering, in the case of this high positive correlation, the value of r will be closer to plus 1. When we calculate the value of r, if the value of r is coming 0.98 or 0.99, then we can say that there is a high positive correlation. But similarly, when we are calculating the value of r, and if the value of r is coming minus 0.97 or minus 0.98, if it is closer to minus 1, okay, if it is closer to minus 1, then we can say that high negative correlation. So the value will be close to minus 1. Now in the case of moderate correlation, it can be positive moderate correlation, it can be moderate negative correlation. Once again, it can be moderate positive correlation, it can be moderate negative correlation. Now in the case of moderate positive correlation, the value of r will be neither too high or not too low. That means the range, the r will lie between 0.25 to 0.75. So this is in the case of moderate positive correlation. Similarly, in the case of moderate negative correlation, here also the value of r will neither be too high nor too low. In that case, the value will lie between 0.25 to minus 0.75. Now last one, we have absence of correlation. Absence of correlation means when there is no relation between two variables. Okay, suppose say increase in price of television has no relationship with increase in the price of shoe. Okay, so that shoe and television are two different things. In this case, we can find that there is no relationship between these two variables or two items. So in that case, the relationship between these two variables will be 0. So here we can say that there is a absence of correlation. So the value will be 0, 0. So this is all about the degree of correlation.